free. Just
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of the day, we are going to be continuing with our positional rankings for Week 9 with the running back position. Now, like I said, you may start to see that the running back position's value will transfer a little bit more into the waiver wire, just because, the depth of so many teams' running back rooms is showing its mettle. It's proving its mettle week in, week out. So it's getting more and more difficult to rank already established running backs for these rankings. But the four guys who I've compiled, I think they have good matchups. I think they project to be high-end, top-tier running backs week in, week out, especially this season. And overall, they are four guys who really are in teams that utilize them a lot more than, say, teams that have deeper running back rooms. Without further ado, let's jump right into our rankings. Starting off with Aaron Jones, going up against a Colts run defense that, like I've said, has not lived up to lofty expectations. And, Aaron Jones, he is a very volatile player just because, the Vikings have been on a bit of a skid these past couple of weeks. So who knows how they'll look week in, week out going forward because of the fact that there was so much hype surrounding them to start the season, and now it's starting to wane. But in order for the Vikings to maintain an air of optimism to what they've built throughout the season, Aaron Jones needs to be an X factor for them going forward. 11.5 fantasy points last week for LA. Kind of disappointing considering, that through all this preparation, after the bye when they were going with the Lions and coming up short on that game, transitioning to that tough road game against the Rams, with them bringing a lot of people back, it certainly felt like, the win was taken out of this Vikings offense sail because Aaron Jones was not a big part of it. But when he is, they are a very dominant team, and they'll get back to winning ways with his play this Sunday against the Colts, because the Colts run defense, like I said, can be exploited. I don't necessarily know if they can really stay in this game if Aaron Jones is on, because their back end too is kind of weak, and Justin Jefferson will always look to exploit weak pass defenses and weak coverage. But at the end of the day, I do feel like Aaron Jones is going to have a monster game. He's primed for this late season run, and he wants to come back with a vengeance after, a little bit of the Vikings hype has dissipated. So look for him to really, really be something that is going to be special to watch this coming week. Then the second play I want to talk about for my rankings is Tank Bigsby, a guy who actually emerged from the depths of a running back room, someone who supplanted Travis Etienne in the Jags' backfield and really made the position his own. He really embodies his name, his nickname, so to speak, and has proven to be one of the most valuable weapons for this kind of topsy-turvy, peaks and valleys Jacksonville Jaguars offense here. He can be the best part of what the Jags do, or he can be completely non-existent because they're struggling in certain games. So look for Tank Bigsby against an Eagles front that's pretty difficult to go against, but not as potent as it's been in recent years. Look for him to try to break them down, because in the grand scheme of things, the Jags are a team that can prove to stick around against, inferior opponents. And they did it against superior opponents. They did it against the Packers, and against the Eagles, I feel like there'll be more opportunities to really make this game closer than a lot of people will think. It's going to stem from Tank Bigsby, because I feel like, there are good things that could happen when Trevor Lawrence with a deep ball, but you want to limit the amount of turnovers he has, and thus make the most out of the possessions you yourself get. So if you're Jacksonville, you're wanting to incorporate and integrate Tank Bigsby in this offense to the best of your abilities week in, week out against these teams, because this stretch doesn't get any easier. And if you want to steal a couple of these games, play spoiler for a couple of these teams, then you need to show variation in your offensive setup. And Tank Bigsby represents the best of that going forward. So look for Tank Bigsby against, yet again, another far superior team to them, to try and break down this very volatile Eagles defensive front. He had 10.6 fantasy points versus Green Bay. Expect those numbers to skyrocket. Now that they know, they have ways that they can stay in highly competitive games against superior opponents. The third running back I'm going to talk about has been one who has been very contentious at the running back position this season, because a lot of people were expecting a little bit more out of him, and this offense really hasn't necessarily been as good in some games where they've played well as people think, and they looked more so bad in games where people felt that they should have won. For example, they've beaten up on underwhelming pass defenses and defenses such as the Bucks and Panthers, but against teams that really can operate their pass rush, they've really struggled. And that also stems from Kirk Cousins' play as well, because we know the limitations of Kirk Cousins at this point in his career. He's not going to scramble, and he's going to try and pick you apart rather than, work out of structure. So in order for that to be an effective game plan for the Atlanta Falcons, you're going to need a little bit more from this run game. And you're looking at one of the best running back rooms in the entire NFL with Robinson and Algier, for that matter. So by incorporating Bijan Robinson a bit more into your scheme, getting him vital touches, and not putting him in danger, or getting him behind the sticks, you can, to a certain degree, get better moments from Kirk Cousins, or moments where you can alleviate some of the pressure on him from decent pass rushes. He had 22 fantasy points against the Tampa Bay Bucks, a team that, isn't necessarily that potent in terms of their pass rush this season. But still, it goes to show that Bijan Robinson is always going to be an asset, whether or not you're facing teams that want to load the box against you, or are facing teams who are a little bit more lax in their pass coverage. So look for Bijan Robinson to be someone who can exploit either one of those defenses, because the Falcons, I feel like, need to discover a rhythm, or else this season could not end up being one to remember for Atlanta, because they have a division lead. But in the playoffs, they want to win a couple of games. You're going to have to find ways to slow down some opposing pass rushes. And Bijan Robinson's going to have to be a part of that. So look for him against, yet again, another pretty terrible run defense to also be very integral to the Falcons' success in this game. So look for him to, against different teams with different looks to them, continue to be an important piece of the puzzle for the Falcons. And the last player that I want to talk about, kind of been pretty underwhelming this season. And as a Seahawks fan, I feel like, it's getting to the point where you're frustrated that this caliber of player can't be involved more in the offense, or through no fault of his own, is being held back by the struggles of an offensive line that's been the weakest in the league. But I think this week there will be some slight opportunities for him to have a big game, and that is Kenneth Walker going against the Rams. Only 8.5 fantasy points against Buffalo, but it was through no fault of his own, right? Because Seattle had a myriad number of opportunities to put points on the board, but were very inept in the red zone, especially deep in the red zone as well, when they could have handed it off a little bit more to Kenneth Walker. But they shot themselves in the foot, and ultimately he didn't find the end zone in this game. The reason why I think he'll do well against the Los Angeles Rams is because this is going to be a game of tactical kind of movements. Because here's the thing about these two offenses. They can move the ball on anybody. I feel like the Rams, now bringing in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, bringing them back from injury, they are going to be able to move the football effectively, especially against this very very puzzling Seattle defense. On the other side of things, though, Seattle has managed to overcome the deficiencies of their offensive line and find ways to, protect Smith, try to get the run game going, despite the fact that their offensive line holds them back against teams of this caliber. So, looking at this matchup, it could be weird to say that Kenneth Walker could have a big day in this game. And I feel like, he is someone who's slowly losing ground in terms of fantasy stock because of the fact you don't necessarily know if his offense can sustain his style of play. But against the Rams, who I feel like are going to take advantage of the Seattle offensive line and try and force Smith to get the ball out even quicker than he's already been doing this season, Kenneth Walker will have more opportunities. It's a matter of schematics here because some of the run designs that I've seen from Seattle this season haven't necessarily been to Kenneth Walker's benefit. They haven't really gotten him out in space enough. They haven't really gotten chunk plays out of him. And in order to do that, they're going to have to find ways against this Rams defensive front to really cover up the limitations of this offensive line, whether it be adding more blocking tight end to their schemes, whether it be pulling more guards, or trying to get away from the outside zone scheme and try and have Kenneth Walker create by himself, use his individuality. They're going to have to find ways to overcome this offensive line because Kenneth Walker is too valuable a running back to, just go to waste just because his offensive line can't sustain him. So look for him in this game and look for this offense to really hinge upon the play of their offensive line because this Rams front can be exploited a little bit. But it's just a matter of covering up your own limitations in order to exploit theirs. So look for Kenneth Walker to have an interesting game. Not one of the better weeks for a running back this week in fantasy, but a game nonetheless where he can prove himself as a premier high-end fantasy running back. That will just about do it for this segment. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. But coming up, we're going to continue with this narrative positional rankings, looking at the wide receiver position. It should be a good segment, yet again, for a position that's continuing to prove to be vital. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about them.